The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, everybody, welcome to our webinar today. This is, in fact, Deja's first ever webinar. But the good folks at the DevOps Institute, well, they're old pros at this game. So today there's going to be two people speaking. I'm going to be the first person to basically welcome you all and introduce you, and introduce Jayne. And then we're just going to quickly step through what the agenda is. I'll introduce Deja, explain who we are and where we fit. And then I'm going to hand it over to Jayne, and she's going to take you through value stream mapping, which is a course that's been around now for a couple of months, I guess. But we're just starting to see some real interest from our customers in it. So, so the agenda then, I'll just step through quickly. One of the things that people often do as they start their transformation or they start thinking about DevOps is they tend to go quickly to areas like tooling and so forth. But actually, value stream mapping is an activity that should precede that. So we'll explain why and why it's important. Then we'll have a look at metrics for DevOps and why they're different. So some of you may have been following our vlog, and we did one on, for example, MTTR is more preferable than MTTF. So we'll talk about that. Then we'll talk about training courses that we offer, both publicly and privately. And then it's your turn, so you'll get the opportunity to ask us some questions. And I see there's a number of questions posted already. Okay, so I'm just going to introduce the company. Deja has been around actually for about 15 years in total. Actually, on Friday, it'll be 15 years. How about that? But about 4 years ago, we started to think about new ways of working. And we got in touch with the good folks at the DevOps Institute, and we started actually in 2015 to offer that first foundation course. And we started to work with a number of companies here in Ireland, companies like Ryanair, AIB. And one of the things we noticed about companies that we like to work with is that they tended to be those companies that led their own change. So our role in that was then to help them visualize what good looked like. And very often that was good case studies. So we attended meetups, went to DevOps days, tuned into not just the DevOps Institute, but also some of our tools partners. And when we go to see companies in the first instance, generally it's a focus on the case study material to help them visualize what good looks like. And that's a term that you'll hear us say quite a bit. Every customer's journey is unique. You know, there are certain core principles, but every journey is unique. And when we engage in the early stage, we like to do that through training. It's a good way for us to get to know you and for you to get to know us. And we don't just offer DevOps training, we also offer training in some of the different tools that we work with, including the Atlassian tool set and Zebia as well. So when we would typically do some training, one of the other vendors that we work with is a company called Agile Sphere. And we actually offer Agile leader training, which goes to the Agile culture side of things, as well as, of course, the DevOps Foundation. Having done some training, we then typically consult on process. Very often that is in a specific area. It could be like, for example, release management, or it could be just Agile workflow. And then very often companies will ask us to help on the tooling side. When we as we build relationships with clients, though, the nirvana for us is the solution, where we actually go to the customer and say, okay, so what is the problem that you're trying to solve? And we pull together the right mixture of training, consulting, and tooling to help with the delivery of a specific solution. And typically that's done on a fixed price basis, where we're effectively taking the risk, but we're underwriting the results of what the solution will deliver. So that's enough about Deja. If I now introduce Jayne Groll is the CEO of the DevOps Institute, and she's actually been there at the helm for the last 4 years as the training portfolio has grown. So I was unaware that she'd been there for the 4 years, but she told me just before we came on the call that one of the reasons she's in the business is because of a friendship with Gene Kim, who effectively introduced her to DevOps. So with that, I'll hand over to Jayne.
Thanks, Brendan. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm very excited to be here today and particularly excited about talking about value mapping and excited that our partner Deja Consulting is bringing that type of education forward. So before we begin, a little bit about DevOps Institute. If you're not familiar with us, we are the continuous learning community around emerging DevOps practices. As Brendan said, was very fortunate to be able to kind of see the rise of DevOps from its earliest days in 2011, 2012, and then also watching the emergence of practices like continuous integration, continuous delivery, and now value stream mapping as they've started to deliver some real value to real organizations. Our vision at DevOps Institute is to facilitate a community where learning's a lifestyle and members have access to the most innovative, inspirational, and transformational content, courses, and certification. We're not a training provider. We work with partners like Deja Consulting all over the world. Right now, about 130 partners in 32 countries. So that's kind of exciting. And we provide the content, and hopefully that content inspires some discussion, collaboration, and transformation among individuals and organizations. And today I'm going to talk a lot about individual competencies and organizational capabilities. But before I do that, I really want to launch just a quick poll just to understand what your familiarity is with value stream mapping, and that'll help me shape a little bit of what I say today. So let me launch that poll. And we'll do it really very, very quickly. And looking at the results, it looks like we're a little bit all over the place, with the majority being somewhat familiar with value stream mapping, some that are not familiar at all, and frankly, some that have heard of it, but really not quite sure what it is. And hopefully by the end of today's session, you'll have a better idea. Excuse me. All right, I'm going to close the poll. Apologies. And share the results. And as you can see, about 11% of our attendees today are very familiar with value stream mapping. 56% say they're somewhat familiar. About 22% say I've heard of it, but I'm really not quite sure what it is. And 11% say they're not familiar at all. So thank you very much for that. I appreciate that, because that really helps me shape the message and hopefully gets you as excited about value stream mapping as I am today. So if you look at my screen, you see what is classically considered the most critical DevOps practices. So we know that continuous integration, developers that are committing code to a central repository daily is absolutely a critical practice, because that's a feeder for continuous delivery and continuous deployment and continuous testing. We know that many organizations are starting to break down their monolithic applications into microservices and capturing their runtime environments into containers. And the newest that seems to be emerging, trending really very, very big right now, is DevSecOps, which is security practices integrated with DevOps. And then if you've not heard of site reliability engineering, SRE, really coming out of Google's book of the same name, that's certainly trending on the operational side. And so many consider these to be the most critical DevOps practices, right? But the reality is there are other practices that are kind of behind the scenes. They're maybe not known to be as tool focused, as ability to be automated as easily, or really kind of sit behind the flow chart, if you want to say that. And the reality is, if we're doing all of those practices that I just shared, but you don't know how and when you're delivering value to your customer, then essentially all you're doing is creating a pipeline that may not be delivering the end result or the outcome that your customer is expecting. So while all of those practices are very, very important, at the end of the day, or maybe at the start of your journey, you should learn how to map your value stream. So we'll talk a little bit about what a value stream is and why it's important to you individually and why it's also important as a capability for your organization. A value stream is everything an organization does to create and continue to deliver value. So if we think of IT as a software factory, and on an ongoing basis, a daily basis, we are continuing to deliver value to our customers in the form of services, from changes, features, functions, ongoing manufacturing of software. I know some of us in IT don't like that analogy, but it is a true analogy. Then we have to understand how we create value for our customers and what we do in order to make sure that that value is delivered on time. The value stream is an interdependent chain of events. If you look at the image on your screen right now, you see a bunch of Post-it notes. Well, the truth is, value stream mapping is often done with Post-it notes, and I'll share that in just a bit, but it is an interdependent chain of events, and it looks at the flow of not only information, but also the flow of materials. So if you start to look at not only your continuous delivery pipeline or your automated tool chain, but you start to look at from when an idea is conceived, maybe it's a change, maybe it's a new feature, maybe it's a completely new application, all the way through the stream that will take it into and beyond production, then that's not only code, right? There's a lot of other assets, including informational assets, that have to travel across that stream. So value stream mapping really kind of looks at pulling value across that stream as opposed to pushing it, right? And the reason the pull is so important is we want to really identify flow. Brenda mentioned Gene Kim. If some of you have read the Phoenix Project, you understand that the first way of DevOps, as defined in the Phoenix Project, is to increase your flow. And part of increasing your flow is identifying what are the activities that are adding value, as opposed to which of those activities that perhaps your organization is executing that's not delivering the right level of value or any value at all, and perhaps might be classified as waste. So value stream mapping really helps an organization, and of course an organization is made up of individuals, but it really helps an organization identify, do you have redundancies, right? 2 units, 2 teams doing the same thing. Maybe that can be condensed down into one. What are your constraints? And again, I go back to that first way of DevOps where we talk about really overcoming constraints in your flow. And then finally, as a lean concept, how do we identify and eliminate waste? And value stream mapping actually is a lean practice that has been recognized, I guess is a good word, recognized as being very, very critical to DevOps. It is the place that you should start. Now, if you've already started, doesn't mean that value stream mapping doesn't deliver value to your DevOps initiative. But if you've not started or you're at the very, very beginning of your journey, value stream mapping is absolutely a great way to identify areas that you can transform. So how does value stream mapping support DevOps? In a value stream mapping exercise or a value stream mapping workshop, there are really 2 goals. The first is to map your current state. So what does your current value stream look like? And as I said, if you saw in that image, there are a lot of sticky notes. And so some organizations that are physically co-located will literally take a wall in their environment, and every sticky note has an activity in the value stream. And so teams will get together and they'll negotiate and they'll collaborate in terms of what are the actual activities that are part of this process flow. And they'll start with the idea and they'll work their way all the way through production and beyond with a series of sticky notes on a wall. So the first goal is to be able to map the current state, and then map the current state. And then once the current state is mapped, the goal is to be able to then map the future state. So you really want to see where you are and where you need to be, because between the 2 is where your transformation plan actually exists. So understanding where you are today is very important. Some organizations actually try to skip that step and go directly to here's what I would like my value stream to look like. And the reality is you don't know where you're going if you don't know where you've started. And that's part of the metrics that are important to DevOps. once you create that transformation plan, then it's important to be able to institutionalize it, because at that point we need to have a shared understanding of what value creation actually looks like, right? So value creation becomes the goal, right? It isn't deployment. It isn't necessarily even the term outcome. It isn't services. The end goal for any organization trying to move forward with a digital or DevOps transformation is the creation of value, because it's only your customers that can define the fact that you've actually created value for them. In addition to all of that, I think one of the great benefits of value stream mapping is that it provides the criteria for success, because underpinning this entire value stream are processes, but most importantly are metrics. There's a lot of data that's collected across the value stream. And by the way, you don't move from your current state to your future state automatically, right? It isn't as if, we map our current state, we map what our future state is, and we're suddenly in the future state. There's a lot of steps that occur between the two. And as the steps, or as the waste is being identified, or as the non-value added activities are being added, more of the stickies are being pulled away. And so there's a collaborative environment, there's a shared understanding of what success actually looks like. And so the net result of that is the ability to prioritize value-added activities, right? In a lean environment, according to value stream mapping, there are really only 3 categories of activity. Value-adding activities, right? Activities that absolutely contribute to value creation. Then there's also activities that support value creation, even though they don't directly support value. And again, I think going through a mapping exercise really helps to clarify that. And then when you start to look at non-value added activities, otherwise known as waste, then it becomes an opportunity to identify how do we eliminate those as well, and how do we prioritize, put more effort, put more resource, put more shared energy into value-added activities. And so if you start to eliminate waste, and again, it is an iterative process, but if you start to eliminate waste one task at a time, then the entire process becomes faster and the flow becomes cleaner. So, as I said a couple of minutes ago, value stream mapping is a great opportunity to visualize your process, right? So you start to look at it from either an idea or a requirement, however you want to define that, all the way through to the creation of value. But it's really also a very, very powerful collaboration tool, because value stream mapping should never be done in isolation. One of the benefits of a drill down workshop like value stream mapping for DevOps is you do get a group of stakeholders together. And while they're learning about how to value stream map, they're also starting to create a value stream map. And again, if you look at the image that's associated with this slide, you can see that there's discussion and there's negotiation and there's collaboration as the value stream map is becoming clearer and clearer and clearer. I've been in situations where 2 teams do not necessarily recognize that each of them are executing the same activity, and that it was unnecessary, that there was a lot of redundancy, there was a lot of do-it-yourself, as opposed to trusting another team for executing a particular activity. Very, very, very powerful collaboration tool. All right. And it's a key element of instilling your culture and creating some type of reasonable transformation plan. If you think of IT as a software factory, and I think that's a concept that more and more ITers, including myself, are starting to embrace, that at the end of the day, our job is to produce software, right? Produce it from a change perspective, but also produce it on a daily basis so our customers can realize value. If I were going to walk into a car factory, I would be able to visualize that value stream very quickly, because I'd be able to see the production line. And I'd also be able to identify where in that manufacturing process there might be an opportunity to remove waste. Right? It's one of the ways that lean emerged. Lean originally emerged in the manufacturing space. In the software factory, that's much more difficult to visualize because we can't walk onto the production floor, and there are lots of bits and pieces of software that are part of our value stream, and there's a lot of different activities that occur in a lot of different teams. So again, can't emphasize this enough. Value stream mapping is a very, very powerful collaboration tool, but it is also the heart, the core of your culture and the core of your transformation plan. How do you know how to transform if you don't know what your current process looks like? Again, it's not very formal. I mean, there are tools, and certainly we'll talk a little bit about tools. There are tools to capture this information, but if you look at this image, sometimes value stream mapping is just a series of Post-it notes. So if we start to look at value stream mapping as where we are today and where we want to be in the future, then how do you know if you've improved, right? How do you know that you've taken good substantive steps by removing waste or really starting to reduce non-value added activities if you can't measure it, right? So there's the old adage that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And so part of DevOps is we have to start looking at metrics. Now, I've been in IT a long time, and I didn't really share a lot about my personal experience. Brenda mentioned I've been CEO of DevOps Institute for about 4 years, but I've spent a long time in IT. And I will tell you, one of the trends, if you want to call it that has really emerged in IT is starting to look at data. We know a lot about machine learning now. We know a lot about predictive data and analytics. And certainly we have a lot of data tools available to us. But sometimes in IT, we don't know quite what to measure. And so many times we use metrics like MTTR, right? Mean time to repair as our core metric, right? That's the one that we kind of float around as understanding the performance of IT, or we may use uptime as our key metric that, we're 5 nines of uptime. But in DevOps, we really want to take a very holistic approach to metrics and measuring. And so part of that is also being able to understand collaboratively how we do that. So you start to look at the different types of metrics that DevOps encourages. And again, certainly there's a lot of interest right now in machine learning and artificial intelligence and predictive analytics. But, when you really get down to the basics, what do we really need to measure in order to understand whether our transformation and our value stream is improving? Well, many don't measure culture, or we don't know how to measure culture, right? We want to look at employee retention. We want to understand employee satisfaction as much as we do customer satisfaction. We want to understand what the call outs are. We want to understand how many times we awaken somebody at 3 o'clock in the morning. We want to understand whether we have the right incentives for our employees, particularly those that are getting called at 2 o'clock in the morning. Certainly want to look at our process measurements, right? We want to look at that value stream. We want to be able to measure idea to cash. Here's where MTTR does play a role, because MTTR helps us identify what our process is when something breaks. And just to stop for a minute and talk about MTTR. So, as I said before, too often in IT, MTTR seems to be the holy grail of our metrics. You have to remember, in MTTR, something broke, right? So mean time to repair means that something broke. And so when we start to look at DevOps metrics, that's important, but let's prevent things from breaking in the first place. And so I think, again, it's an important metric, but not the only metric. Other process metrics, delivery time, change frequency, change success, things like that. Quality metrics, if you're a QA person, certainly you understand that we need to be able to assess how many tests have passed, how many tests have failed, what's the best and worst of the tests. And by the way, testing is now a competency that everyone in IT must embrace and develop some core understanding of. Certainly want to measure your system, certainly want to measure your activity, absolutely want to measure impact. We're talking about measuring and metrics related to the value stream. So if we're delivering value, we should see faster transactions, more customer feedback, certainly throughput in terms of how customers are using our services, and really understanding what the impact is on the bottom line. Automation plays a key role in metrics. It's not the only tool that's necessary. Certainly understanding how to write a good metrics plan so that you understand what continual improvement looks like, and also to understand whether your value stream is getting closer to your future state on a steady and regular basis is important as well. So having said all of that, and I know that's a really fast overview of value stream mapping and some metrics for DevOps, the other aspect of DevOps is skilling. And so I spend a lot of time at a lot of conferences talking to a lot of people about skilling. And so understanding digital transformation also means that we have to have transformational competencies and capabilities. And there's a real difference between competency and capability, right? Individuals become competent and organizations develop capabilities. And those capabilities are the sum of many practices, and certainly the contribution of the competency of the individual. But in order to be able to really cross into this new digital age, there's a lot of focus on skilling, upskilling, cross-skilling for both the organization and for the individual. And so I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there's a real trending approach to modern skilling that suggests that how we've skilled IT professionals in the past, really we're an organization of specialists. I mean, I said I've been in IT a long time. And if you sort of look at the evolution of IT, the way the technology grew also grew the silos and the branches of the IT tree to be able to form teams or squads of specialists. So we all became a little bit of an I, right? I am a database administrator. I am a software developer. I am a systems engineer. I am pick any of the tool specialist, right? I'm a ServiceNow, SAP, Oracle. I'm sure I'm missing a bunch of tools in there, but we really kind of pigeonholed ourselves into this kind of specialty niche. And so our leader, team leader, manager, director, however that worked out, was also a specialist in our competency. And so we contributed to the challenge we have today, which is siloing. Well, in a modern age, the I-shaped individual needs to now evolve into what we call a T-shaped individual, where you still have your specialty, but in a cross-skilled team, or now called a squad, everyone on the team has to have a broad set of skills. So your specialty may be that you're a software developer, but your broad set of skills may make you a test-driven developer, or it may bring security testing, or at least the ability to read test logs into your skills portfolio. So your skills portfolio is now very broad, and the top of the T means that you have acquired enough competency in a lot of different areas, not necessarily at a highest level of expertise, but enough to be able to work within your team and also to perform certain tasks on your own. And then if you really take it further, you can become pie-shaped or cone-shaped. But really, I to T is where we're encouraging the IT professional to move. And so depth of knowledge is as important as breadth of knowledge, right? A broad-based set of skills coupled with your specialty, and you've got a very multidimensional IT professional. So, as I said, upskilling and cross-skilling is very trending right now. And as I also said, individual competencies and organizational capabilities are both ingredients for transformational success. So on an individual level, being able to acquire those skills, both for your specialty, but also for your breadth of knowledge is important. So as I mentioned, everyone should develop some competency in testing. Testing now starts with that first line of code, and test-driven development is important. Understanding pipelines, understanding architectures, specifically those that are built for continuous delivery. Everyone has to develop some type of understanding of security, because under DevSecOps, security is everyone's responsibility. And so I think those are pretty clear. Leadership capabilities, I mentioned site reliability engineering, competency in specific tools, regardless of what platform you're using, are all part of your skills portfolio on an individual basis. But organizations also need to groom their capabilities. And so value stream mapping for DevOps is a core capability for every organization. Again, I can't say it enough. If you don't understand your stream of value, how do you understand how you can improve that software factory production line, right? How do you understand how to increase flow and remove constraints? Also understanding metrics, right? So it isn't just let's write a metrics plan, but really understanding how to not only collect that data, not only how to produce those metrics, but what to do with them, right? So we can be overwhelmed with information overload. We can be overwhelmed with data. Really making data decision capability is very important as well. And then the last is understanding how to adapt IT service management for DevOps. And there's lots of other capabilities coming down the pipeline, but these three have emerged as key to successful transformation. Understanding your value stream and how to map it, understanding metrics and how to collect and use those, and then how do you adapt processes like change management for DevOps are key as well. So I want to take the last part of today's webinar, talk a little bit about skilling. And skilling, of course, comes in the form of training, right? Skilling occurs in a lot of different ways: peer-to-peer mentoring, hackathons, consulting, workshops. But on an individual level, historically in IT, we prove our competency through certification, right? And again, if you think about it from an educational perspective, we kind of prove our competencies from our early days in grade school through university and beyond. So at DevOps Institute, we took a little bit of a different approach than perhaps some others in the space, where we've stayed away from generics, right? So no DevOps expert, leader, master, things that really are not hireable skills and are not individual competencies. So don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but just to recognize that Deja Consulting does offer all of these individual competencies that contribute to your organizational capabilities. Certainly, if you've not taken DevOps Foundation, I encourage that for everyone, because that's how you develop a common understanding, right? Common vocabulary, common definitions, common understanding. But I think equally interesting is this focus on organizational capabilities. So we know that from a certification perspective, a large number of individuals will go through a certification like DevOps Foundation. As I just said, that will create that common understanding, common vocabulary, really starting to look at shared accountabilities and metrics. But we also know on a certification level, when we start to move into more advanced certification, that becomes very specific to the individual's role, the individual's goals, and certainly from an organizational perspective, not everyone who goes through a core level of training will necessarily move on to that. So we built these drill down workshops, as the name implies, to drill down into a specific practice, so that organizations can develop that capability through more prescriptive guidance and practices without the pressure of a certification exam. So everyone can go through a value stream mapping workshop. In fact, as I said, powerful collaboration tool, and really start to work through some problem solving, right? That kind of shared negotiation, shared collaboration, without the pressure of a certification exam. It's very, very immersive in the sense of that you can really have the experience and start building, say, a value stream map that can then be continued after the workshop is over. So taking a little look at agendas and what's included in two of the DevOps Institute's drill down courses now being offered by Deja Consulting, you start to understand where value stream mapping comes from, but more importantly, you start to build your current state map and even a little bit of your future state map and start to identify not only where are the gaps, but what are the barriers to flow, right? So which are the activities or constraints that are facing your organization that perhaps are preventing a faster flow of value to your customers? So, as you can see from this agenda, it's pretty detailed. It's very, very immersive. It is intended to develop a plan of action to avoid some very, very common mistakes, and then to start taking what you've learned and applying it on a regular basis. Value stream maps should be reassessed every 6 to 12 months in order to be able to understand where you were, where you're going, and what type of wasteful activities perhaps you've eliminated. Same thing, whoops, there we go, sorry. Same thing with metrics for DevOps. DevOps Institute is introducing a metrics for DevOps drill down. Metrics and value stream mapping are both deceptively simple, right? They seem like they're very, very simple practices because, again, we collect a lot of data and a lot of tools. Therefore, we should be able to create metrics out of that. And, we can map our process on some type of a flow chart, and therefore we have a value stream. And the answer is it's not true. There is really training that's associated with it. There is good best practice guidance that are associated with both topics. And so if you start to look at the course agenda for metrics for DevOps, you really start to look at measurements have many flavors, right? There are agile measurements for development, there are IT service management measurements for operations, certainly lean measurements for value streams, and then tying it all back to the 3 ways of the Phoenix project. So again, I encourage everyone listening to really, take a deeper look at some of the content in these drill down courses, because I think there's a lot of value that's available when members of the same team or maybe members of multiple companies go through this type of shared experience. So our partner at Deja Consulting are going to be launching some value stream mapping for DevOps public trainings in both London and Dublin. You'll get a copy of these slides, and certainly go to www.dejaconsulting.com events to be able to register for those open enrollment public classes. They do also offer private training on or off site, and so I would encourage you to reach out to Deja Consulting to learn more about that. So with that, I do invite our attendees to connect with us, both from Deja Consulting and DevOps Institute. There's lots of ways to connect both socially and through the web, and I hope that you will become part of our continuous learning community. So with that, I'm ready for some questions. Aisling, do we have any questions? Brendan, can you hear me?
Hi there, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Hi, yeah, we had some questions. So if you just bear with me a second and I'll just pull them up here. Okay, so one of the questions that came in was, what tools would you recommend to automate data capture and measurement across the processes?
So that's a great question. And it's not an easy answer, because truthfully, every part of the value is underpinned by a tool or more than one tool. And I think many of the tools capture data. So instead of looking at a single tool, I would suggest looking at, they call it the API economy now. I would certainly look at building interfaces, collecting data from multiple tools, and then perhaps federating it into, there's some really great tools, Datadog, Splunk, and others that are really designed to be able to kind of capture that data. I know CB Labs does some really great data amalgamation. So I don't think it's a single tool, but I think that organizations should really focus on really being able to kind of collect it and analyze it through some type of a hub using APIs.
Another question that came in is kind of related would be about how would you normalize the data, especially around silos and geographies?
And by the way, I love that question because I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have in IT is that we have so many silos with so many tools and so many different perspectives on our data. And I would tell you, I think that's an outcome of the value stream map. That part of the outcome of building a current state value stream map is identifying where does the data live? How are you using the data that you currently get? What data do you not need anymore, right? I think that's a really difficult question. And then coming up with a set of shared accountabilities. One of the things about metrics is that metrics are often used very positively, but they also can be used as a weapon. And I hate that, but I know organizations that are very concerned about metrics programs because they're concerned that they it becomes blame, right? And so I think part of the value stream mapping exercise is to be able to say, okay, based on what we see today, here are going to be the key metrics that we're all going to live by. And so normalizing the data then becomes easier because we know what kind of shared accountabilities we're going to commit to, which means we all win or we all lose together, as opposed to you didn't do that or you didn't do that or the data shows some type of blame somewhere else. So my hope would be that the data gets normalized after there's some type of an agreement of what are our shared accountabilities.
Excellent. Another question that came in was examples where value stream mapping is hard or easy. So is there characteristics where value stream mapping is easy to apply and characteristics when it's quite difficult?
That's, again, another great question. I don't think it's ever really easy, but I think it depends on the level of detail. So doing a high level value stream map of a process where, you start to look at the architecture of your continuous delivery pipeline, which is very, very high level, right? So it's going to be, develop and then build, test, deploy, and working your way forward from there. At a very high level is probably easier than if the level of detail gets certainly much more granular. So I did a value stream mapping exercise in a class once where they couldn't get past card 2. And it's because they got down to this really detailed level of a specific activity and they couldn't agree on what to call the activity or what parts of the activity to eliminate. And literally about 20 minutes later, they still hadn't made it to card 2. And so I think that's where it gets very difficult. So my advice would be to really find somewhere in between the two, right? So it's easier to start at the top, right? A very, very high level value stream map, and then start to work with multiple teams to kind of break it down into a much more detailed level. But if you start at that very detailed level, I think it is almost impossible to move forward because there's too much negotiation. It's easy to get lost in I call it the minutia, right? Like, what should we call this activity? Who cares, right? Let's identify whether the activity adds value or if it doesn't. So I think finding the right level of where to build the map will define whether it's easier or hard.
Okay, and one of the questions that came up around, and you've kind of answered it in your last answer, but it's specifically around difficult team members and how you negotiate with difficult team members or difficult teams. And you alluded to it in your last answer, but I guess it's is it, I don't know, is it personalities, is it culture, is it because you're getting too detailed too quickly?
Now it's really a little bit of being a territory, right? So most of the time when you have a difficult participant in an exercise like a value stream map, is they're holding on to their territory. And so again, part of the culture, I think you're right, and part of it is cultural, is that why are they holding on to their territory? Are they concerned about job security? Are they concerned about pride? Is it a competency question? So really kind of recognizing where that kind of territorial approach is making that person difficult, where they're concerned that if an activity of theirs is considered to be waste, then their value is questioned as well. So I think that, value stream mapping, one of the reasons an educational opportunity like value stream mapping for DevOps is so powerful is that you have a neutral facilitator. So you have an instructor who can help the attendees really start to overcome some of those difficulties because they're a skilled facilitator. And so if it does seem like the difficulty is coming either from a cultural perspective or a territoriality perspective, a skilled facilitator can help the group kind of move on from that and hopefully give the difficult customer or the difficult stakeholder a win, right? Some opportunity that they can win in the value stream and not be threatened by perhaps a loss of territory.
Okay, good answer. That brings me to the end of my list of questions. I'm not sure, Brendan, have you got any questions?
Yeah, there was two questions that came in from attendees as they registered, right? And I think you've answered one, but I'll just go back on it. It's what level of granularity should we aim for in defining the steps in value streams? And I guess, Jayne, what you're saying is start high, find the constraint, and then start to go granular.
Yeah, I personally believe and I think that makes a lot of sense, is that before you can really get down to the level of detail, you have to kind of understand the core activities at the top, right? Because it really is difficult to move from, card 1 to card 2 if that level of detail doesn't map somewhere to a higher level activity. So I suggest that it's good to start at a higher level. Now, that doesn't mean that at a higher level it disallows certain attendees, but I think that part of the goal of value stream mapping is to help attendees develop systems thinking, right? So if you look at the entire value stream, you're starting to look at your system. And I always say IT is a system of systems, right? And so you start to understand kind of systems thinking. And then once you understand systems thinking, you can start to understand what your place is in the system, or what your set of activities or your handoffs are within that individual system, and then can kind of take it from there. But until the organization and everyone associated with this delivery of software understands the highest level of systems thinking, it's really hard to move down to that next level of granularity.
Good, that's a great answer. And then the final question that came in was, I'll just read it out to you. It's an interesting one. In our current scenario, release moves along different paths dependent on the nature of the change or the defect identified. How do I simplify and identify metrics that I can gather so as to identify improvements to lead time to delivery? So I guess this is a question around somebody who maybe is getting too much data rather than trying to identify what the right data is.
Well, and again, if I interpret that question, I would sort of suggest that we're not only looking at metrics, but we're looking at process. So for example, in release management, the person asking the question is right. Different changes may go through different branches of a process. And usually that'll show up in models, right? Where we can build release models or change models that say, if it's this type of a change, here's the path that it will take. And that's really not value stream mapping. That's really process mapping, right? Where we start to look at an individual process like release management or change management. And there are branches that if it's a small, low risk change, it'll go through this part of the process and we'll get this kind of data. But if it's a very complex change, it'll go through a different model and we'll get that type of data as well. And to me, that's really interesting when we kind of associate that back to the value stream. So process mapping would be that you start to look at, and maybe that's a webinar for a different day, but you start to look at building models that say, okay, different types of changes or releases really have different models. Some go through very, very quickly because they're automated, they're low risk, we understand what they look like, and they're fast. And so the amount of data we need back about those type of standard changes is really pretty nominal, right? And then you have the big, ugly, complex changes that are long and risky and, you know, really touch a lot of different underpinning applications and require a lot more decision making. And so we build a model for that. And maybe the data we need back about that release is more data, right? Different level of metric than we did about the standard change. So I think when we start to map that back to metrics, and understanding what do we need to measure, for the standard change, you didn't need that level of complex data. For the complex change, you probably needed a much higher level of complex data. And then you map that back to, okay, what level of data are we delivering? Are we doing a one size fits all? And is that a wasteful activity that maybe we could pull out of the value stream for certain types of activities? Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, Jayne, that's good advice. You clearly know your subject. Well done. Okay, those are all the questions I have.
Okay, I see something that somebody, let me go back because I really do want to emphasize the fact that learning more is available through Deja Consulting's value stream mapping, public training, and also private training. Sometimes, you know, in a public training class, I will tell you, you know, I love both. And I think both public training and corporate training have an enormous amount of value. Sometimes it's great to kind of step away from your own organization and understand a practice like value stream mapping and work through with people going through the same journey that you're going through, but in a different organization, right? So you get to kind of share successes and challenges across multiple organizations and come back to your own with perhaps a fresh outlook. On the other hand, as I said, on the corporate side, you know, having a shared experience with your colleagues certainly starts the journey a little bit faster and gives you a leg up in terms of building your value stream. But I hope that people listening take advantage of either. Okay, any other questions?
Okay, I think that's it. Jayne, once again, many thanks. That was really insightful and valuable 50 minutes of your time. I think we're all good and I think we're finished.
Okay, well, thank you all for spending some time with me today. I wish you a great rest of the day and really good learning. Okay, I think with that, we'll end. Brenda Aisling, thank you so much for your time. Deja Consulting, thank you so much for your partnership. And hopefully we'll see you all in class soon.
Thanks, Jayne.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.